It's really great to be here again. Jeremy, thank you for that wonderful intro. I am Dan Griffin. I have been doing this for a long time, and I have never been at a conference like this, and that is pretty special for me. So I just want to say a big thank you to TJ and the rest of the team. And, you know, I've been here almost the whole day, and I think they've done a phenomenal job. So how about like some recognition for TJ and the folks for doing this? I don't know if anybody knows what it's like to put on an event. Like, I've done that. I've done conferences. I've done 1,000-people conferences and 800-people conferences. Like, it's a lot to do this, and it's a lot to put yourself out there. So congratulations to you. And like I tell my wife all the time, it's not the size of the conference that matters. So, all right. All right, that's where we're going. So, some people are like, oh, that's going to be that kind of talk? Jesus, come, I'm ready to go. It is an honor to be here, and I feel a responsibility, you know, as a man being in this space. And I have to say that not only do I feel a responsibility, but I feel very vulnerable as well. And part of the vulnerability, I mean, the title of the talk, very, very intentionally on my part, is called Confessions of an Unconscious Man. And, you know, there are people in here who've heard me talk before, who've heard me over the years. I've been doing this for a long time. Next year will be my 29th year in the field. I just turned 50. I don't know how 50 feels, but I don't feel like 50 would feel if I thought I knew how it felt. But what I will say is, this talk, I already know, like, I've been dreading and really excited about this talk. If any of you have that kind of experience where it's like, you know, you're going to say something, at least to me, hopefully to you as well. And I've been praying about this and just kind of setting an intention. And my intention really has been, say something that matters. Don't just say something, right? Say something that matters. Don't just, because as Robin and others who have heard me before will attest, I used to seek to be provocative and controversial. I thrive on it, right? You know, put myself out there, get people uncomfortable, say things that nobody else is going to say, and then walk away. And, you know, today, that spirit is still, that's a core of who I am, is to be a truth teller. I know that. I know that about me. I say the stuff that people don't want to talk about, you know? And it's scary. And I didn't used to honor how scary that is, quite honestly. I just go out there and just blurt it out. And that was part of my reenacting all my little trauma, right? You know, as I could just put myself out there, feel incredibly exposed, incredibly vulnerable, and then freak out afterwards. And so, like, today, that's what I want to do, right? I want to be thoughtful. I want to be really thoughtful, because in this space and this topic and this subject and who I really want to show up as and to honor, you know, what we're talking about and how we're talking about this topic of feminine energy and what that means. And so, like I said, this already feels vulnerable for me. And so I have one request, and I've learned this over the years. As I said, it is probably going to be controversial, provocative. It may actually trigger some of you, hit some wounds or hit some stuff for you. So I'm just giving you that ahead of time. But after I've done one of these talks, it's pretty intense, and I feel pretty kind of vulnerable, right? So if I hit a nerve, if you have a critique, right, for me, please save it. Honestly, follow up with me, send me an email. I will honor whatever you have to share with me. But what I can tell you is, if you're looking for me to respond effectively and wholeheartedly, I will probably not be able to be in that space as a result of this, right? So I've learned to say that because I get these people who I've triggered, they come up and they've got this agenda and they want to be, boom, in my face. And I'm like, whoa. And I don't always respond the way I would really like to, right? Because I feel that responsibility. So maybe not just for me, but for all of us, I've been a trauma-informed speaker for over 10 years now. Before trauma was, the hip buzzword, I was learning and talking about it. And Dr. Adriana talked about the four-square breathing, the box breathing, also known as combat breathing. I use it in all the curriculum that I've written because it is incredibly effective. So what I'd like to do is for you, to just take us through that really quick. So if you would, sit up, relax. You can shake out your hands, shake out your head, right? And then what we're going to do is we're going to breathe in through your nostrils for the count of 4, hold it for the count of 4, breathe out through your mouth for the count of 4, and rest for the count of 4. And I'll take you through the first one, and then we'll just do 2 more on our own. So breathe in, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, breathe out, 2, 3, 4, rest, 2, 3, 4. And then just 2 more. All right, thank you. I notice I'm always just even quieter, after I've done that. I'm also, I have to say, I am addicted to PowerPoint. I didn't know it. And I'm not one of those PowerPoint people that creates the slides, in 10-point font, and it's got tons and tons of stuff. I just have a picture. All I have is a picture. But boy, do I use that to guide me. So I'm going to start by saying, what do I have till 6? Is that right? Okay, 4:45. I'm kidding. I want to start by saying I always wanted to be a good man. Always. As a little boy, I didn't have that modeled for me. And so like many little boys growing up with angry, rageful fathers, kind of saying, I will never be that guy, right? And I just wanted to be a good man. And when I was hanging out with my friends, and they were talking about the things that a lot of guys talk about that didn't really resonate with me, and I just was like, I don't want to, that doesn't fit for who I am. And then when I was in undergrad, a woman came up to me. I was in sociology, and a woman came up to me and she said, "Hey, Dan, why don't you take the sociology of women course?" And I said, no, no interest. It was not on my radar in the least. She said, it'll be a lot of women. And I said, oh, okay. And she used that on me to change my life forever, quite honestly. I took the sociology of women course in my semester of 1993 in undergrad. And it was there that I learned about gender. And it wasn't there that I learned about how it was impacting women. I learned about how it was impacting men. I learned, I sat, this is before recovery, right? So I sat in a circle, and really there were 2 of us men, and all the rest women. And we sat in these circles, and women shared stuff that I couldn't believe. I tried to be as respectful as I could, but I was so naive. And that semester, we took over a building because of rape on campus at James Madison University. Yeah, I'm calling you out. Rape on campus, where the president at the time refused to do anything to take it on, and actually had been known to be drunk at a lot of the fraternity houses where some of this was happening. And so we got together through our class and we took over a building in order to try to get that. So like that was my trajectory for being a good man. I was on track, right? And so it was, so that's always been like an intention of mine, right? And I'll talk about this more, but what I've really learned is that I don't really care anymore about being a good man. I don't think that's the answer. And I'll share more about that. The way that I talk about things now, that I'm willing to be a little more honest, is, if you had a video of the very worst things I've done in my life, like just a video of the worst things I've done in my life, including in my sobriety, you would petition for me to be arrested and put in jail. Truly. Like if you saw that collection of videos, and if you saw the videos of the best things I've done in my life, all the amazing things that I've done, and you had only that video, you'd petition for my canonization. So then the question that we have to ask, so which is true? Who am I? Who is Dan? Who is he? That guy? Is he that guy? Right? So given this topic for this conference, I thought it'd be important for me to talk about this next piece, and that is, I want to share with you guys my first time. I was with my girlfriend, and I was in the car with her. My father had just died from chronic alcoholism, drank himself to death at the age of 54. This was my best friend. We were in Florida. I didn't know it, but I was overwhelmed with grief, overwhelmed with many things, and I was just really, really happy to be with her. But interestingly, I didn't feel happy, if that makes sense. And so we're in Florida, and we are in the car, and something kind of came over me. And as we were getting closer to some friend's house, she said something, and I got a little upset. Then she said something else, and I yelled at her. Like I yelled at her. And that was the first time I had raised my voice and was verbally abusive to a woman other than my mother or my sister. And, it was one of those things where it was like, wow, what just happened? And what did I do? And then, of course, what did we do? We got out of the car and we put on the happy face for the friends at the dinner, and we had the dinner. And then we didn't really even talk about it afterwards. And that, for me, crossed a line, obviously, right? But it said something to me that I didn't know and that I wasn't conscious of, right? The theme I wasn't conscious of, but it said to me, if I get scared, if my attachment issues are going crazy, I can yell at a woman. I can say whatever I need to do. I can do or say whatever I need to do to try to get myself safe. So I talk about this concept in all my work called the water. And it starts, anybody familiar with David Foster Wallace? Amazing, amazing author. But he did a commencement speech at Kenyon College, and he started with this little parable of these two fish at the bottom of the ocean. And another fish swims up and says, "Hey guys, how's the water?" and swims off. And the two fish look at each other and they say, "What the hell is water?" Right? So that's us. We are fish in the water. And as a sociologist, I was trained in many ways to see the water. Now, when I started looking at gender, then that was like a huge part of the water. And then when I got into recovery, there was another element of the water. But then we looked at race, and we looked at class, and we looked at sexual orientation, we looked at gender identity, and we looked at all these different elements that are part of the water. That's all part of what makes us who we are, that we don't even realize, right? I mean, when it comes to gender, how deep it runs is around the world. Around the world. When a woman's pregnant, what's one of the first questions we ask? Well, if she's pregnant, we may or may not be asking her about her period. But we are probably saying, are you having a boy or a girl? Now, that's not just in this country. That's around the world. And did you know in some countries, that answer literally determines whether that baby will be born or not, whether that baby will stay with its parents, whether that baby will be taken into be a child soldier. And in this country, we have some very interesting rituals around it as well, right? Because now we're not really asking anymore because we have what? Gender reveal. We have the gender reveal party, right? Yes. So we have the gender reveal party, which this is like the sociologist in me, but some of you are going to be like, I really don't care. But the term is incorrect. It's not gender reveal. It's a sex reveal. And even calling it a sex reveal, has some degree, because sex, we now know there's so many components that make up sex, and there's much more of a continuum than we ever thought. All this stuff that TJ was talking about. Gender, as we understand it, is evolving. Sex and sexuality, as we understand it, is evolving. Our whole consciousness, in many ways, is evolving, right? But that's the water that we're in. And, in the water are these messages about being boys and being girls, and not being a boy and not being a girl, and a man and a woman, and all of this. And then a black man and a black woman, or a Latino man and a Latino woman. I mean, there's intersectionality, right? There's all these different ways that it all comes into each other. But in the water, we have these things called the man rules and the woman rules, and then the rules of gender, right? And we've talked about some of it today, but this is a big part to me of consciousness, right? Is as we begin to see the water. So just for my sake, just say out loud, what are some of the man rules, right? What are some of the rules that we learn as boys about how to be a man?
Don't cry.
Don't cry. What else? Be strong. Man up. What else?
Don't be into boys.
What's that?
Don't be into boys.
Don't be gay, right? Be straight. Don't be gay. What else? Don't what? Don't hit your sister. It's okay to hit other boys, but don't hit your sister, right? So we have that mixed message. What? Boys will be boys. We don't even know what that necessarily means, and yet we know what it means, right? You could say man up to somebody, and it's not even really clear, but it's clear when you're saying it, it's not a compliment. It's clear it's not really being supportive. Right? So that's part of the water. And then we have, and when I do this talk, sometimes I take an hour just to name the man rules, because there are so many, and it's so rich, and it's so contradictory, and there's so many different aspects to it. And then you have, again, in the binary, which is really being stretched in our society, in our world today. But in the binary, it's still the dominant model. You have the woman rules. What are some of the woman rules? Be quiet. Look pretty. Look pretty when? Always. Always. Wear dresses, right? What else? See, there you go. So man up, that's not ladylike. And again, it's like some people, they say, get back in that box. Get in that box, right? That man box or that lady box. But we have some sense of what it is, and we learn over and over and over through all these micro interactions, right? This process over years and years and years. We learn about what's okay and what's not okay. And then I have these people, who will be in the audience sometimes and they'll say, oh, come on, Dan, like that doesn't apply anymore. If it doesn't apply anymore, then why do I sit with a group of 16-year-old males who give me the exact same rules? If those rules didn't apply anymore, they wouldn't be coming up with the same exact ones. They're there, they're in the water, but they're also saying, but they don't affect me, right? And so I haven't quite figured all of that out yet, but there's no question it's different. In the time, like TJ was saying, me growing up, there were different clear messages about being a man, but it's shifted, and media representation has been different. And when we saw General Schwarzkopf cry, does anybody remember that? That was like a huge, huge moment in our society from the militaristic perspective that General Schwarzkopf would actually tear up, right? So it's like those little things have been punctuating our experience of gender for decades now. But yet these rules persist. And what's very interesting is some of those rules, for the man rules, the strongest ones I've found are the don'ts. Don't cry. Don't ask for help. Don't be vulnerable. Don't look weak, right? Don't feel. And then again, as it was said earlier, don't feel other than anger, right? So anger is like the one emotion out of all of them that men are allowed. And then it's like, okay, well, you can be angry, but don't hurt anybody with it. You can be angry, but don't cause any problems. You can be angry, but you got to connect with people. And so, like, there is this deep, deep emotional confusion, I think, for so many men, right? I certainly had that. And then there's this whole thing about the research. The research shows that when a baby boy is born, he is held less, caressed less, talked to in a different tone, allowed to be by himself longer. Anybody have any idea what that sounds like? Yeah. Hello? Attachment. Like, to the degree that being a man in this society in many ways is its own attachment disorder. The way that these hallmarks for masculinity that we have that are so bound by disconnection. Everybody's always talking about, oh, connection is so wonderful, and oh, the world is about connection. We got to connect and connect. And it's like, okay, that's great, but what about for 50% of the population, many of us, who have been programmed to disconnect? Like, how do we do that? Just like, as this emergence of the feminine energy is coming into corporate world, what's the number one attribute or quality that people are looking for in executives today? Emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence, right? So how do we develop emotional intelligence? And part of the challenge that I've found over the years is, how do we reconcile the contradictions of it all, right? Because the man rules, at the end of the day, the man rules are about safety. And I think if there were one word, as I've talked to men over the years, and the younger men especially, what I hear over and over and over again is confusion. It's confusing right now. What kind of man do you want me to be? What kind of man is going to get acknowledgement? What kind of man is going to get acceptance? What kind of man is going to get her to accept me? And the mixed messages that men are talking about that they're getting from women at times who are also confused about what they want, right? Because we're all in the water and we've all taken in these messages over years and years and years, and it's like, oh, I think I want a sensitive guy, but wait, you're being sensitive, and what the hell are you doing? And I'm just not sure how to react to that. And so it's like how much that stuff is operating. And so the water to me is a fascinating place for us to really look and explore because it's everything we don't necessarily see. It's the way that we operate on a daily basis, the interactions that we have, the judgments that we have, the messages that I have about men and about women as I raise a 13-year-old, who's dating. And how are my ideas that I've kind of taken on over the years in the water, how are those influencing how I respond to her and what she's doing and what she's not doing and how I support her? And so I try to be as conscious as I can more and more and more about how to do that and how to notice those things. But what I've found is that this water runs very, very deep. And so what I've also come to see is that the water is not clear. The water is not pure. There's a lot of toxins in the water, right? Anybody want to just throw out, what do you think might be some of the toxins that are in the water from what we're talking about? Judgment? Chauvinism? The stigma of having feminine energy when you are a male, which is basically every male. So, right? So, I mean, but that's part of it. How do you navigate a society that tells you to hate yourself? Because that is what the rules of gender do. They tell us to hate women, to hate themselves, and men to hate themselves. And then they also tell men to hate everyone else who's trying to get any of their power that they've been told is the thing that's going to keep them safe and give them a life worth living so that they can get something, right? So those are the toxins in the water. And so racism is a huge toxin. Sexism, homophobia. But then like that's here. Underneath it is like, it's the judgment that we have. It's trauma. It's addiction. It's mental health. It's shame. Right? I mean, can you imagine, just imagine if we could wipe away, just like somehow have a magic wand and get rid of all the addiction, trauma, mental health, and shame in this world. What would the world look like? I mean, just imagine that, for me, that vision is unbelievable. Would it get rid of everything? I don't know. But it would certainly shift the way we interact and connect with everybody. Everybody. And so those are the toxins in the water that make it harder for us to see each other, to see ourselves clearly. We're drinking it in all of the time, and we're just trying, right, to do the best we can, as was said earlier today. We're all just trying to do the best we can. And so it's not meant, my point is not to like overwhelm. It's like, oh my God, we got all this stuff. What's the point? I mean, it's to notice, right? Why did I interact with that woman the way I did? Why did I interact with that man? What's how can I show up more authentically if I have awareness of these? But it's also like my relationships, and how are my relationships going to show up? So I show up in this field about 10 years ago. I've written a book, A Man's Way Through the 12 Steps. I've co-authored a curriculum with Stephanie Covington, if you're familiar with her, helping men recover. I write another book, A Man's Way Through Relationships. I'm doing presentations, and I'm working with programs, and I'm doing keynotes, and I'm getting standing ovations, and oh my God, it's like I'm awesome, right? And people are listening to me. I have a message worth listening to, and that's in my head. I don't want that to have as much influence as it does, but it does, right? I mean, it just does. It does. I mean, if you've ever had a standing ovation by 1,000 people, it's kind of a crazy thing, right? And then people coming up to you afterwards, men crying, coming up to you afterwards, it's like, holy shit. And it's like, all right, God, I'm just trying to be of service. And then you got that whole stuff in the background that you can't even admit. And underneath all of that, for me, was this shame. And the shame was the hypocrisy that I was living. And the shame was that I was trying so desperately to present the image of a good man. I was very successful at presenting that image. I was doing very well, but I was not being a good man. There were things that I couldn't, I don't even know. I stand here today and I'm like, how did that continue? And I say, shame and trauma and attachment issues and all this confusion in relationship. But the bottom line is I was acting very disrespectfully and abusively to my wife. At the same time that I was out here being Mr. Conscious Masculinity, Mr. We got to do this, and there were women who could see it. There were women who could see it, who said, you sound like you're angry. Well, I am angry. That's how we get shit done, man. That's how nobody changed the world being like, and that's actually not true. But that's what I told myself, right? That's what I told myself. Yes, I'm angry, and people are listening to me. I'm being heard, right? And so what I couldn't reconcile, right? What I couldn't reconcile was the shadow side of it all. I couldn't tell the whole truth. I couldn't live the whole truth. Right? And so there were, and I don't want to turn this talk into like some modern day social confession, because that's not the intention. But the intention is to talk about, I was trained at a very, very early age not to just hate myself. I was trained to hate women. You talk about the water that I grew up in. The water that I grew up in was a father hitting his mother. The water that I grew up in was a father who truly treated his family like a dictatorship. Now, I thought, now here's the kicker for me. For some of you, you're gonna be like, no, that's not that profound. I had done so much work on my dad. I had grieved his death. I have written letters to my dad, angry letters, this letter, that letter, that letter. I've done circles. I've been crying, in the fetal position. I had done so little work around who? My mom. I had no idea. That's I think the thing that we miss sometimes. The whole picture. The wounds that I was carrying around that were allowing the behavior were as much about the wounds from my mom as they were from my dad. And that made no sense to me because I was the guy who I had like this part of the shadow for me was like all men are bad, right? So I had to really work through that. And I would do like these big trainings, and we'd have like 2-3 day trainings on this curriculum, and women and men would come forward and they would be like, I love my dad. My dad was the best guy. And in the back of my head, I was always like, oh, you're just in denial. Like it took me some real time to hear like, oh, there's really good dads out there, right? And then the shift for me was like, the bottom line is, and I really, truly hope it does not sound like I'm making excuses, because it's just more than anything, as I've attempted to understand, how could I, a young man who wanted nothing but to be a good man and a peaceful man, how could he end up violent and abusive? How is that possible? How? And you see, of course, if I ever acknowledged that, it would mean I'm not a good man. And so there was this constant fight of my inability to reconcile those with each other, right? Now, some people may be saying like, dude, what are you talking about? You just don't do that. I get it. Just like telling an alcoholic, just don't drink. It's complicated. Who's talking to men about attachment? Who's talking to men about trauma and the overlap between trauma and addiction and mental health, right? Nobody was talking to me about that. We don't talk about it still in some parts of the 12-step community because we consider it an outside issue. You know how many outside issues are killing people? So it's kind of like what I had to come to see was that I needed to truly embrace like the shadow. I needed to acknowledge, like, what do they say, right? What you resist persists. And the degree to which I was resisting that abusive father, that abusive man, was the degree to which I was perpetuating that same thing. And like a lot of alcoholics and addicts, I could also say, oh, I never hit her. Right. I never was physically abusive or this or that. I could paint a picture around, I could talk to some friends and I'd be like, and pardon the expression, but God, she's such a bitch. That's true. She is, isn't she? Right? And so we collude with each other in having that conversation. And the other thing is that I could go to meetings, I could talk to my sponsor, I could tell other people, I'd be like, oh man, I got upset with my wife, without telling the truth, right? What did upset look like? That's what I now say to every guy that I work with. What does upset look like for you? What are the behaviors of upset? Because suddenly upset then turns to anger, turns to rage, turns to abuse, turns to violence. And that's what upset was, right? And so again, it's like, I love that term of hugging the monster, right? Or the line, I think it's from from some movie, Only Love Can Kill the Demon, right? That it's not original by any stretch of the imagination, this idea. But the idea of not just facing and embracing the shadow, but truly hugging the monster. Truly confronting it, facing it, loving it when it seems like the most unlovable, right? And so what's my point? I mean, I think this topic is incredibly important. Not mine. Topic of this conference, feminine energy, right? And so in my mind, I'm thinking like, yeah, that's right. We got to love the feminine. right? But I think as not just a field, but as a society, as individuals, as families, as human beings, as communities, I mean, if we really, really want to embrace feminine energy, I mean, I think, personally, we have to acknowledge how much we hate it. Like, you can't just love something without acknowledging all the other stuff that's there. I was so young when I was taught to hate the feminine, taught to hate crying and support and comfort and compassion and receiving, all of the things that we quote unquote are feminine that actually are really, really important to me. I was, like a lot of guys in recovery, a more sensitive, emotional kid. I was like that little boy who was like, you know, when the other boys went and killed the frogs, I just couldn't do it, right? I mean, like, I was that boy. So I had judgment about myself being a boy for a long time. But it's like, I think, you know, and I'm thinking of you all and the work that you do for the men that you work with. I mean, I think there are some really, really, I think there are some real missing conversations in the work we're doing with men. I really do, in this society today. To really, really prepare them, not just to stay sober, but to have healthy, loving relationships. Like, to be able to do that. If I've been trained my whole life not to be able to have relationships, and then you say, okay, hey, welcome to recovery, go get great, you know, connections, awesome, go have great relationships. But wait, you've told me not to be emotional, not to be vulnerable, not to do, you know, all this stuff that it takes to have a healthy relationship. I've been trained either, you know, to not do, to not value, to, or to even, like, for some, it's connected even to the trauma that they've experienced, right? And so I had no idea kind of what happened every time I stepped into a crucible of intimacy and vulnerability as a man. I had no idea kind of what was, you know, coming up for me. So, you know, I think the lesson for me in all of this is I absolutely 100%. So 5 years ago, everything came crashing down. It not only were things not going well with my wife, which, by the way, the whole time that things were not going well, I was getting help. I was trying. I was going to programs. I was doing this. I was telling you know, I finally started telling the truth. There was all this stuff about that. And 5 years ago, the universe works in absolutely mysterious ways, but sometimes you just need a 2x4 across the head. And I got it. And there's no way, without doing the work that I've done, could I stand up here and say I'm grateful for that 2x4, because it knocked the freaking wind out of me. I mean, I have not been talking at conferences for, I mean, just this past year, I just started speaking at conferences again. Not even really doing work, just doing some writing, just dabbling in some writing, because of the shame and the defeat and all of the stuff that it churned up for me that was driving the work to begin with. The idea of being a hypocrite, the idea of being an imposter, the idea of not being a real man, right? All of that just got totally fueled, and I got to really take a look at that. And part of it has been really coming to love within myself, slowly, not completely, that feminine aspect, that stuff that I was taught to hate, that stuff that I was taught to devalue, that stuff that I see some men in my life are amazing examples of embracing and acknowledging that part of who they are. They guide me. They help me with that. And I'm incredibly, incredibly grateful. And so it's a journey. You know, it's a big journey. And I think, you know, at the end of the day, and I'm going to end with this, at the end of the day, it's it's so easy, I think, in our society to get caught up in the either or, right? You're either this or you're that. And we get into that black and white thinking, even just calling it, right, black and white thinking. But it's that whole idea that it has to be either or, and the both and for me is what really has come to be the truth, the solution, right? So it's not, hey, let's go to the other end of the spectrum and then just honor the feminine because we've been valorizing the masculine. Well, that's a recipe for failure and a lot of suffering and success. But do we need to honor the feminine? Absolutely. Do we need to heal the masculine? Absolutely. Are we all in this together? I guess, as cheesy as it may sound, the use of the metaphor of the water for me is really important because we're all in the water, right? Which means we're all in this together. And the way the toxins in the water are set up is it's that, like, you're my enemy, right? I'm the problem, right? And granted, like, right, white, male, heterosexual, well-educated. I mean, I tick all the boxes for privilege, right? So in some ways, like, I've had my time, right? But in other ways, it's kind of like we all have to be a part of the solution. And I feel the responsibility, going back to what I said at the beginning for this talk, I feel the responsibility to at least tell the truth a little bit better than I have been up until this time. Not, ideally not for me, right? And hopefully for the people and the professionals like yourselves working in the field. But I think also, probably most importantly, quite honestly, because I want my wife, when I come home, to celebrate or at least, feel good about the work I was doing while I'm home, and to see it modeled with her daughter, our daughter, in our home, so that there's real congruence. And so, like I said at the beginning, I've absolutely given up on trying to be a good man. What I want to be is a conscious man. And I know for that, I don't have to do it perfectly. I just do the best that I can, and I don't do it alone, right? Because we're all in this together. So, thank you.